My 96 Geo Metro, just over 100,000 miles. I checked the timing belt and it was still in good shape, but I figured I have to go and replace the gasket on that lower crankshaft because it was leaking. So I figured I might as well get a new timing belt for it. But I had a really dickens of a time getting the bolt off that shaft. And in order, what I saw online and I replicated it, it worked really well. Make sure you've got your timing belt on. And then I went and disconnected the main power to the alternator so that this thing, or to the distributor, so that the thing wasn't going to pop off. And then what I did then is I got myself a long-handled wrench, put it on this, and tied off the handle so it wasn't going to go anywhere. And then I hit the starter. And the starter had enough power with this bolt being on a wrench and the wrench being tied so it's not going anywhere, and it spun the thing right off. It worked really quite well. I remember that this rotates clockwise, so when you're tying off your wrench, you got to consider that wrench is going to be trying to spin clockwise, and it worked quite well. The other thing that I had a dickens with is the old seal popped off really good, and the new one I took and I put silicone around the edge, but I had a hard time getting it pressed into place in there. I'd push one side in, the other side pop out. I didn't have anything that would really fit on it, and I thought, wait a minute, I know what fits on it. This fits on it. So I put the seal in the best that I could, and I took this and slid it onto the shaft and used a pry bar and pressed it in as best that I could. And then, let's go underneath and I'll show you what I did. Here's my good old pry bar that I was using. There, underneath here, you can see what we're up against. I was able to press this in, but when that thing pressed it, it only pressed it up to this point, and it still had to go back in with about 1/8 of an inch. And so what I did then is I took a socket, this one here, and I went around the edge with it, and I did this from the top, and the pry bar from the top, I could push against the frame and pry this inward. And so I put the pry bar against the back of this, and it would press this in, and it would seat that, and I'd go all the way around it using the pry bar to press on the end of the socket, and the socket was pushing on the gasket, and the gasket went all the way flush, because the gasket has to be flush with the frame of the motor here. And I had to wipe off the extra silicone sealant, but she's on there and ready to go back together. When I was taking the timing cover off, I was having a problem, and a lot of people have this problem, but when you go to take the nut off the end here, this whole shaft wants to turn. And so what I did is I took out the observation thing and put a 10-inch wrench in here, or a 10mm wrench, and that was able to get around the shaft to keep that shaft from spinning. And then I got another 10mm on the nut on the outside, and then was able to turn that off. And now when I'm putting this back together, it's pretty hard to tell. I mean, I've got it fairly snug right now, but I know that this thing's going to loosen up over time, and it's such a pain in the rear to take that cover off, and I don't want to cut the cover. Some people will slice it off right here, but one of the problems that I had was when I was taking the bolts off, that bolt broke off, that bolt broke off. They did not want to come out. No matter how much I fought them and lubricated them and worked with them, they snapped off. So I don't have that one I can attach it to. So I'm going to put the whole cover back on, but this tensioner here, when I took the thing apart, it was pretty much, well, it had also come loose, but it was pretty much at that end of the movement, and I put it halfway through the movement here, and I'm going to tighten it out, tighten this down and tighten that down, but that may be a little bit tight for what it needs to be, but it will loosen up, and I don't want to have to go back and redo it, so hopefully it'll be okay there. Yeah, well, I think that's okay. Something else interesting that I discovered here, in order to work on this car, on the crankshaft in that lower area, you've got to take this panel off here, It's a plastic panel, and I just went and just pulled these out, and a bunch of them broke, and this is what's in there. And what I did not realize is they have actually a release on them. I mean, this is how they're sitting in there, and you actually have to take something and push in, use a key or something to push them in slightly, and then they will pop out. But several of mine broke, and when I went to the ones that were good, I went to put them in. They were real sloppy. I didn't like them at all. So what I did is I went to the car parts store, and I picked up these. They're slightly thicker, and they are, here is the box that I got them in, Toyota parts, and they work a lot better. They're a lot more snug. So another little tidbit. This is really fascinating. Last night I stayed up and was watching YouTube videos and reading up on it about the tension of the belt. And different people said they do different things. Some guys tighten them really tight, and other guys say no, if you do that it will mess up the bushings and the bearings that are behind this. It'll mess up the bearings that are in that pulley, the tensioner there. So then I thought, oh man, I'm going to tear it apart again this morning and loosen it up because I think I had it too tight. Well, I tore it apart this morning, and come to find out the belt had stretched. And it was nice and loose, and I loosened up that bolt there and that bolt there because a lot of the guys were saying you should let the spring set its own tension. And you just tighten it up to where that spring pulls it. Well, I went and let the spring set its own tension, and it stayed right in the middle of that tensioner swing arm there, right where I had it set before. As a matter of fact, since I loosened it up and let the belt set its tension, it actually tightened up the belt a little more than what I had it yesterday. So I don't know if I think my belt just seated itself in. One guy said that you should be able to take and push this belt back and forth on this pulley, and that's the right tension. But even if I have this thing completely loose, I can't slide it back and forth. There's just no play on that. I mean, it just does not want to slide. So that's not a good rule of thumb. The rule of thumb that guys are saying is to let the spring set its own tension, and then you're supposed to crank this clockwise for 2 full revolutions to let the belt set itself in, and then tighten these up. I would actually recommend, because of how I saw that this thing stretched itself, that you put the belt on and let the belt set its tension. I mean, let the spring set its tension, tighten these up, put that pulley on it and the belt back on for the water pump, and literally let the thing idle for about half an hour, and let this thing run without the cover on it, and then go back and loosen this up again, and then let the spring set its tension again, because I was surprised with half an hour of driving how loose this thing got. But there you can see down in there, it's right in the middle of the swing arm, and that's the spring that's setting it. So it was too tight last night, and it was just perfect this morning. So, and one of the things that's interesting too about these is that when they get warm, that the aluminum will expand. There's actual expansion, and so the distance between the top pulley and the bottom pulley will actually become greater as the aluminum expands itself. So that's something to keep in mind. But there we go.